If you don't know me, my name's Nicole Grabow. I'm trained as an objects conservator. I work for the Midwest Art Conservation Center. We're based in Minneapolis, so not far from here. So I was able to bring my big sculpture today because I didn't have to bring it on a plane. I'm trained as an objects conservator, which means I work on anything three-dimensional. But I also do a lot of work in preventive conservation, which is, as I say, the kind of conservation that you don't have to be a conservator to do. And so those are some of the techniques that, good art handling protocols are considered a preventive conservation technique. And those are a lot of the topics that I try to focus on with my workshops at ATALM. I do not have a Native background, and the art handling protocols that I'm sharing with you were not written by people with a Native background. So hopefully they will still be useful to you in some way. But what I hope to share about them is that these guidelines and these protocols were established with longevity of the artwork and minimizing the risks of damage in mind. So we're thinking about having artifacts last as long as possible and suffer as little damage through handling as possible, which are things that I think are relevant to all collections materials. Additionally, when we're working with Native collections, there are a lot of aspects to artifacts of cultural heritage that have unseen meaning. And I believe that as cultural stewards, as collections caretakers, it is our job to protect the story that the objects have to tell. And so we need to know as much about that story as possible. And it could be that for the artifacts in your care, there are things other than longevity and risk of damage that are important for you to consider. So I want you to be thinking about that as I talk about these things. These guidelines that I'm providing for you, they are a starting place. And I encourage you to go back to your institutions and to look at your policies and to think how they need to be modified to be what is right for you and what's right for your collection. Particularly, there are often handling restrictions associated with certain types of objects. Those need to be communicated to your staff and respected. That is part of the meaning, part of the story that the object is telling. And sometimes wearing gloves or not wearing gloves, having an object exposed to air when it's in storage, not covered, sometimes these things are extremely important. And it's important for us as collections caretakers to know when that is the case. And when we don't know, to do what we can to find out. Talk to the elders, talk to other people in the community, other people who work in the organization to find out. Sometimes we're working in communities that are not our own. You may have a Native background, but you may be working in a tribal community that's different from your own. And the rules and the handling restrictions may be different. Likewise, in your tribal collections, there may be things from many different communities in those collections. The same rules don't always apply. So the more information you can have, the better. But that said, I will give you some of the basics. And I define an object as anything for which I expect its lifetime to outlive my own. So if it's something in my house and it's mine, it's my artwork, I'm not as concerned. But as soon as it's something that I expect to live for several hundreds of years, then I think of it as an object, and that has more of a sacred character in my mind. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. That may be the things in your collection. There may be things in your collection for which that doesn't apply. Sometimes artworks are created for ephemeral reasons, and that's important to know also, that you may need to adapt your handling protocols for something that's not intended to last. And sometimes there may be things that are in your house that you do want to pass on to future generations, in which case I invite you to adopt these policies for those as well. So one thing that it is important to keep in mind as you're handling artwork or considering handling artwork is that things do break when they're handled. This is something to always keep in mind, is that the stress of being picked up, of being carried has much more of a potential impact than continuing to sit on the shelf or in the box or wherever it was before. So I encourage you to minimize handling whenever possible. think before you go to handle an object, do I really have to move it? Or can I move myself? Or can I put it in a box and then move the box and handle it less? So always be thinking about ways that you can minimize the physical contact with the artifact. And eliminate extra movement if you can. Go straight to the destination location without taking any detours. And then I've got here these 6 object steps, object movement steps. So step 1, identify your destination location. You need to know where you're going, because you don't want to be in a position where you're holding an object and you're like, I don't know where, I don't have a space to set it down, and you don't have a hand free. So identify your destination location and be sure that there's space. If you are traveling to another room, your destination should probably be a cart. I didn't bring any carts with me today, but there are 2 main types of art movement carts that we use. There are carts that are flat, that you can put objects on, that have 4 wheels, these kind of like Rubbermaid carts, and you kind of push them and a couple of the wheels turn. Those are good for 3-dimensional objects. And then there are carts that are called A-frames, and they're kind of shaped like an A, like this. And they have a little trough at the bottom, and that's for something that needs to travel vertically, like a picture frame is going to be happier like this, especially if it has glass in it, because you don't want to break the glass. So this is going to be happier like this. If it goes on an A-frame, it'll be kind of tilted at an angle and supported like that. So depending on what kinds of collections materials you have, you might be able to do with just one of those kinds of carts or both of them. You know, if you have a lot of framed pictures or paintings or photographs, you'll need an A-frame. But if most of your things are 3-dimensional objects, something like this can travel on a flat object cart. And I say that when you're going to another room, you need one, because if you can't see your destination location, you need to be prepared to use your hands to open doors, go up and down an elevator, things like that. The second step is to clear a path. Make sure that there aren't any chairs or cords or other people or bookcases in your way. You don't want to have to, again, you don't want to need your hands while you're moving an object. You want your hands on the object. And then you should, I recommend, in my experience, it's a good idea, to examine the object for weak or vulnerable areas. It's always good to know as much as you can about your artifact before you go to pick it up. And sometimes it may be something that you've moved before and you don't need to take a lot of time with this step. But if it's something that's new to you, I do recommend that you kind of pause and take a moment and look at it and listen to it and see if there's something about it that is not immediately obvious that you might need to know before picking it up. If it has any breaks or loose areas. My near vision is terrible, so I use these magnifying frames that you get at the grocery store. I totally recommend them. They're cheap and they're awesome. So, you know, just taking a moment to say, okay, this is probably going to be light. It's probably not going to be heavy. It might be fragile. Looks like it's got a little repair in this area, so maybe I want to not pick it up by that. Just take a moment. Even if you think you don't need to, there might be something about it that has changed. And the more complex the object is, the more time you want to spend looking at it. There's a lot that you can learn about something just by looking, if you slow yourself down and just let the object talk to you. So some object movements require more than one person. And that is an important thing to consider also as you're doing that exam. Can I lift this myself? Do I need someone to help me? The basket, kind of a single person move. The horse, maybe not. This might be a 2-person move, so think about that. It's not a strength competition. When moving artwork, you want to be well within the limits of your physical strength. You never want to feel strain. If you think it might even be just a little bit heavy, it's better to have another person. But make sure that if you do have a team of people, that you're communicating with them about the steps of the move. So It's good if one person takes control and is the leader of the art movement, and then that they communicate the plan out loud. And this doesn't have to be a big deal. You don't have to be like, I am going to be the leader of this art movement. You know, you can just say, hey, you know, Rita, can you take that side and I'll take this side and we're going to go to that table over there. You know, but someone needs to do that. Someone needs to take charge. You can't both be like, I don't know, are you going to lift? Am I going to lift? Be assertive and make sure that it's understood where you're going and what you're doing. And then when you're working with a team, when you give the command to lift, I recommend just saying, ready, lift. Because if you say 1, 2, 3, no one ever really knows if they're supposed to lift on 3 or after 3. I mean, it's not a big deal, but just, you know, for clarity, that is my recommendation. And then once the object has been moved, examine it again. Take a look at it again to make sure that nothing has changed, that it's stable and secure. Just slow down, pause. Okay, is this all right? Is it okay? Is it well supported? Did anything fall off? Are all the pieces with it? Again, that slowing down is important. Also, when you're handling, be aware of hard objects on your clothing. If you're wearing rings, sometimes I'll take my rings off when I'm handling an object. You know, if you've got like a zipper showing or anything metal that's on your clothes, try to be aware of it and to not put the object in contact with that. If you're handling something that's large and has a little bit of weight to it, it's totally okay to cradle it with your body, to take some of the weight onto your chest. But just make sure that you don't have anything that's going to scratch it. And you might want to take off your ATALM badge, for example. Gloves. Gloves are an interesting issue. I'm not going to give you any rules about gloves. I'm just going to give you some information. I almost always wear gloves when I handle artwork. And this is the kind of glove that I almost always wear. It's not necessarily always the perfect answer. There's no one solution for everything, but this is nitrile. It's, what can I say? It's non-allergenic. It preserves a lot of the sensation that you have in your fingertips. I prefer this over cotton for a lot of reasons. I don't like wearing cotton gloves. I don't wear cotton gloves. They're slippery and they can snag, especially on something like basketry. Some of the cotton gloves come with those little plastic dots to help preventing them from slipping, but the dots fall off and then they get in your collection and they get everywhere. So the reason why I wear gloves is because there are oils in our skin that can be transferred to the artwork, and over time they can build up. But this is where I'm thinking long term. I'm not thinking about 6 months. I'm thinking about hundreds of years, and I'm thinking about a lot of people handling this object. Short term, oftentimes the effects of the oils on your skin are not immediately apparent. And depending on what you expect to the lifetime of the object or what the greater importance or significance of the artwork is, there are times when bare hands are better. You do have more sensitivity in your fingers. And if it's an object that is really, really delicate, sometimes clean hands are better. I would recommend not wearing lotion on your hands if you're considering handling an artwork with your bare hands. I would also recommend being very aware of whether the artifacts in your care have been treated or may have been treated with any pesticides. We're not just concerned for the safety of the artwork, we're concerned with our own safety as well. And it's very common for native collections materials to have been contaminated with poisons. When in doubt, always protect yourself. And these gloves will protect against that. These gloves are disposable. We are actually, in our lab, we're looking to change the brand that we use because we found a company that will recycle them. I can't remember the name of it off the top of our head, but our safety officer is working on it. So what we're starting to do, I think next month, is we're going to be ordering from this company, and they're purple, they're not teal, and they're a little bit thicker. But so when we take our gloves off and throw them away, instead of throwing them away, they'll go in a recycling bin, and then every month we'll send it back to the company to recycle them. So if that's something that is important for you, know that that option does exist, and you can find a company that will do that, and it's not very expensive. I think it's like $15, or I think the cost of these gloves is $15 and the cost of those gloves is $17. So it's a little bit more, but it's not hugely significant. Remember also that clean hands are better than dirty gloves. So do change your gloves regularly, especially if you have handled an object that you think may have a poison on it, or may simply be very dirty or dusty. There are other things. There's mold, museum dust, things like that that you don't necessarily want to transmit from one object to another. So, you know, change your gloves regularly. And then there are certain types of objects that I use bare hands for, and that is usually paper objects I will use bare hands for, sometimes fragile basketry materials. I think I may have listed some here. What did I say? Plastics. Highly polished plastic surfaces can scratch really easily, and sometimes your fingers are better for that. But materials that are particularly sensitive to finger oils include metal, glass, plastic, gilded wood. Metal is interesting. Have you guys ever, have you heard of rusters? Has anyone heard that term, a ruster? Some people have very acidic body chemistry, and their sweat and the oils on their fingers can cause metal objects to rust really quickly. It's pretty common. I've known several rusters. I'm glad that I'm not one. But I went to grad school with a guy who said that he found out that he was a ruster when he was working in a museum. They were doing an installation, and the case material was polished metal. And after they did the install and put the vitrine on, you know, and he looked and he was like, oh, the positioning is off a little bit. And he'd already taken off his gloves. He took his thumb and he just pushed the case like an inch back. And he went back into the gallery 2 days later, and there was a bright orange thumbprint on the case. So he's a ruster. So if you are a ruster, know that you might be one. You know, see what you can do to find out if you are. Some people just cause metal to tarnish more easily than others. Everyone's finger oils will cause metal to tarnish. And somewhere around here I have a silver bowl. What did I, oh, it's over here. This probably has fingerprints on it. So metal is a really good candidate for the kind of always wearing gloves strategy. Although here, actually, the fingerprints have been like a resist that has prevented the tarnish from forming. So, okay, so maybe that's not an example of exactly what I want to show, but you get the idea that tarnish happens, metal corrodes. Gloves are good. It's good to be comfortable. It's good to be comfortable with your hand protection. If you've been using cotton gloves and you want to make the switch to nitrile gloves, practice a little bit first before you handle something that's really precarious, because it does feel a little bit different and the sensation feels a little different. But know also that you will get used to it and adapt to it. But there are always situations in which there are exceptions. So keep that in mind too. And there are 3 different sizes: medium, large, and small. So hopefully we will have time to do a little, you know, practical exercises so you guys can try them on, figure out what your size is if you don't know already, and see how they feel. So let's see. And then there's some tips and tricks here that are specific to different types of materials. So just some of the things to look for when you're handling paintings is that oftentimes paintings are framed, and the frames might not be secure. So check the attachment between the painting and the frame. Check the stretcher itself. Sometimes the stretchers are loose and wiggly. And then sometimes stretch paintings have stretcher keys in the corners, which are used to adjust the tension, and those keys can fall out really easily. So take a moment before you handle a painting to look and see, are there stretcher keys present? Are they secure? Are they going to fall out? Is it going to freak me out? You know, just kind of know ahead of time. And look for, if you have cupping or flaking paint that's really severe on your painted surface, you might choose to transport the painting flat like this instead of on an A-frame. Because if you put it on an A-frame, gravity is going to want to pull those flakes down if it's a really, really fragile surface. Most of the time we prefer to have a painting vertical. But if the condition of the surface is really bad, you want to bring it to horizontal. What else with paintings? I'm not a paintings conservator, but frames often will have loose elements on the surface, particularly if it's really ornate, if it has molded things like this, you know, and if you've got losses, like on here, then that's kind of a signal. Oh, there might be other elements that are loose. But give it a little check, even if you don't have losses, just to make sure, because these can pop off pretty easily. And just know, and if something does come off when you're moving it, you need to be able to collect it and keep it with the object so that it can be reattached. Paper objects should be carried horizontally and supported when possible. So what I mean by supported is on some kind of a board or a substrate. I've brought some examples of some rigid supports and also some softer supports. So these are all things that I use regularly. This is Coroplast. It's corrugated plastic. This is nice because you can wash it. If it gets dirty, you can like wash it and reuse it. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's nice for that reason. This is archival, acid-free corrugated board. Sometimes it's blue on both sides. Sometimes it's just blue on one side. It's always blue. I don't know why. There are different vendors who provide this. We usually get ours from Gaylord or University Products. This is 1-ply. So at this size, it's still pretty sturdy, but you can see that if it were a lot bigger than this, it would start to cave. Somewhere I have a 2-ply. That's something else. I'll find my 2-ply. There's a 2-ply piece too, so you can see it. You know, it comes a little bit thicker. You can also put 2 pieces of 1-ply together. And if you find you want a little bit more support, and this is the material you're working with, you can see the pattern of lines on it, the way that it goes. If you want to put 2 together, turn the other one 90 degrees so the lines aren't going the same way. And that'll give you a more rigid surface to help distribute your weight. There is also foam core. This has a foam core and then archival paper on either side. Keep in mind that the foam itself is not an archival material, so it's just the part that comes in contact with the object. And sometimes this can start to turn yellow. It's a good idea to check it at that point. This is a little bit more rigid, but then once it breaks, it's like, it's useless. I'll pass these around if you guys aren't familiar with them. You can kind of feel how they work. So when one is here's my 2-ply, the 2-ply board. If one is handling a piece of paper, it's nice to put it on a support. You're minimizing your handling. You can kind of keep it down with a little pressure on the edges or the corners, and then you can sort of take this wherever you want to go. If you want to turn it over and it's big, I don't know if you know this trick, but here's your paper. Rather than flipping the piece of paper over, you can sandwich it between 2 supports and then turn the supports over, and voila, you have the other side. That's true for textiles also. Anything large and flat, you can always sandwich and turn. If your paper is very large, opposite corners, gentle curve in the middle. Identify your destination location, clear a path, examine your object, come up with a plan, lift and move. For example, a big piece of paper like this can be lifted from opposite corners and handled with minimal damage. This is acid-free blotter paper, which is not a rigid support. This is a soft support, but this can be used for handling paper objects also. If you have something bigger, or if this is just what you're comfortable with, this can be used. So I have some soft supports here. Acid-free blotter paper. This is 100% cotton rag paper. We use it for all kinds of things, and art handling is one of them. This is Tyvek. There are two different kinds of Tyvek. There's soft Tyvek and hard Tyvek. This is the soft one. It's slightly nappy on one side and then smooth on another side. It's very strong. You can crumple it, you can sew it, you can iron it. This is a nice soft support. Good for textiles, for large textiles, which are often handled the same as paper. You put a support under it and then carry the support. How do you spell that? Tyvek, T-Y-V-E-K. And then this is hard Tyvek, which you can hear, it's got snap and crackle to it. This creases nicely. It's a little bit stiffer, a little bit more rigid. You can't really sew it, but also good. It's an inert material, polyolefin, I think. So good for transporting things that need a soft support. It's also good for lining boxes. If you have boxes that are made out of maybe not the best material, because we all know that the archival board is really expensive and sometimes you have to use what you have. Sometimes you can line with something like this, line it with the Tyvek, and that'll help to protect the object. Ethafoam sheet. This is also really nice for lining boxes, especially if you're dealing with something really brittle that you want to give it a little bit of a cushion. You don't necessarily want it to be on the hard bottom of a box. This can, help with that. And then the last soft support that I brought is, this has a couple of different names. One brand is called Remay, and another is called Hollytex. It's a non-woven polyester webbing. This stuff is really strong. It's really hard to break it. This is great for, actually we do disaster response with this. This is good for pulling wet paper out of a flood because it doesn't get soft when it's wet like paper does. So you can put it behind a piece of paper and then lift paper out of a bath. What is it called again? This is called, there are two different major brands that make it. One is Remay, R-E-E-M-A-Y, and the other is Hollytex, H-O-L-Y. I think it's just one L, T-E-X. And it's not too expensive. Here, I'll pass this around because it's small and you guys can feel it. It feels weird. It's sometimes with native collection materials, it's important that you use natural materials rather than synthetic ones in contact, in which case I would recommend something like what is this called? The blotter paper, because this is 100% cotton. The rest of these are synthetics or plastics. And the blue board is also a natural material. So if you have your choice between this and having a natural material in contact with your artwork is important, know that this is your better choice. Functionally, they're pretty similar. Okay, so I'm digressing. Where was I? I was talking about handling paper. We're halfway through. I want to give you guys time to do some practical stuff. Avoid placing it in a drafty location because paper can blow away. So then for three-dimensional objects, it's important to identify old repairs, weak joins, cracks, breaks, fragile surfaces, etc. Something like this broken ceramic, right after ceramic has been broken, the break edges if it's a new brake, they're really, really sharp. So A, don't cut yourself, and B, try to keep them sharp, because if this is ever going to be repaired, it's really good to have crisp, clean brake edges. So try to avoid handling something broken by the brake edge. And obviously, if it's broken, it's good to know that it's broken before you pick it up. Consider the weight of an object. It's not always possible to tell how much something weighs by looking at it, but you can get a good sense of it. And sometimes you can do a little exploratory, oh, how heavy is this? I also recommend the pointed stick. The pointed stick is a good tool for kind of testing things out. Oh, is this going to move when I touch it? How it can just give you some more information about the surfaces that you're handling. Avoid handling objects by their handles, which is counterintuitive, of course, but often the handles are the most vulnerable areas. For example, on this basket, there's a hinge here. This is designed to move, which means that during its usable life, it was probably moved a lot, which means it might be weaker. So if this were in my house and I were using it, I would just, pick it up by the handle and la-di-da. But if it's in my collection and I want it to last forever, I'm going to pick it up from the base. I'm not going to pick it up from the handle. Same is true for mugs and teacups and kettles and anything really that has chair arms, anything that's protruding, that's long, that's skinny. Try not to handle it from that. You want to handle it where the center of the weight is and from the thickest pieces, the pieces that look most stable. I like to use a lot of supports when I'm handling objects. If something is broken and it's in multiple pieces, it's a really good idea to keep those pieces together, because as soon as I take this and I put it over here, it's like, oh, does this go with that? What if I leave and then go to Mexico and no one, is this part of that? The information that goes with an object can be really vital in some situations, especially when something's broken, especially when something is part of a set of dishes. Might mean nothing if you just have a sugar bowl, but might mean everything if it's the full set that belonged to my great-great-grandmother that she used when the Queen came, or whatever the story is. You need to be able to preserve it. So boxes are really nice. Boxes or trays. We usually end up making our own, but you can also buy them pre-made. They're more expensive that way, but it's expensive to spend the time making them too. We always have interns make boxes for us. And there are lots of different ways to make a box, but you can see this one's made from that archival corrugated board. It's good to have a variety of sizes on hand. And then you can handle the box, and you don't have to handle the object. But make sure, I don't know if I would trust this one. What I would do is I would put some supports in. So this is ethafoam. And this is a letter opener. And we have scraps of this lying around. And you can easily cut yourself little wedges and say, oh, I'll just put this in here, and then it won't rock around and it won't hit the next thing. Ethafoam comes in two thicknesses, or two densities. It comes in lots of thicknesses, but two densities. That's the softer one, which I find more useful. I use that more often. This is the harder one. This is the denser one. I don't use this as much, partly because it's a lot harder to cut. But when I have a really heavy object, this is what I put under it, because this is really a lot thicker. That soft one will compress quite a bit. And if you have, say, a bronze sculpture that weighs 200 pounds, I'm going to want to put that under it instead of that. We also have weights that we sometimes use to secure objects. These are what we use for weights. They've got lead shot inside them. Sometimes people fill things with sand. You can buy weights that are really expensive and cover them with fabric and use your creative expression. But it just needs to be something heavy that's not going to damage an object. And you can use this. When would I use a weight? I might use a weight to I might use a weight to hold like a ceramic that has a curved bottom to keep it from tipping over. I might put a weight against one side. We also have snakes that are filled with sand, kind of fabric snakes filled with sand. Those are actually a better thing to put under a ceramic, because then you can kind of make a little ring and set your ceramic in it. You can make rings out of ethafoam to set round bottom ceramics in so they don't wiggle and wobble. That's a good idea. Let's see. Also a good idea to keep a free hand on an object that's on a cart while you're moving it. When we walked this over from my car, the bellhop put it on the cart and I just held on to it, you know, because it wiggles and wobbles, and I wanted to make sure it didn't fall over. So what do you do when something goes wrong? Because it may. In fact, it probably will at some point in your career. If you're handling objects, something will probably break. So stop and take a deep breath and don't panic. And keep in mind that, you know, things do break when they're handled. Don't immediately jump to like self-loathing and hatred. Just sort of keep it in perspective. Without moving anything, determine if the object has been damaged. Sometimes an accident will happen, you'll run into something, something will drop, someone will run into you, and there's no damage, and that's awesome. So just take a moment and cease, and then sometimes there's a lot of damage and it's really obvious. But try to, again, slow down, like we do at the beginning. It's like, don't immediately think that you know what the situation is. Let the situation tell you what's going on. Maybe there's one major break, there might be other minor breaks too. So just, now you have a different art movement on your hands as soon as something is broken. So take a look at your object again. It's a new object. You may have a different destination location. You may have a different place that you're going. So just like start from the very beginning. If there is damage, call for the registrar. If there's none available, or if you are the registrar, I recommend taking pictures of the scene before you move anything. This is also like, I realize this is kind of the idealized location. It's not always possible to go through all of these steps, but just kind of keep this in mind. Like it's good protocol. If you have to change the rules to match your situation, it's not the end of the world. Once you've taken photographs, you can move the damaged object to a secure location. And I really recommend that you do this. A lot of institutions don't. I think it's like, oh no, it was damaged, we just want to forget that it happened and move on. But I think it's really helpful, especially for the person who was holding the object when it broke, to write down exactly what happened. It's like part of the healing process. But it's also good for the institution to be able to refer to that information later. So what I would include, if you have all this information, I would include the accession number, the name of the object, the location where it happened, the people who were involved, where you were going, and then just a brief description. You know, Joe was walking down the hall and he slipped and dropped the ceramic and it broke into approximately this many pieces, and then we did X. You know, it doesn't have to be a novel, just something to document the situation. And then that information can go into the object record. Everyone has different ways of keeping object records. Maybe you're computerized, maybe you have index cards, maybe you're a work in progress. Whatever you have, work with the system that you have. Find a way so that information stays with whatever other information you have about the object. It's part of its story in your institution. And then remember that accidents do happen. So it is important to take any accident, especially one that involves art damage, seriously, and to consider how things could have been done differently, how it could have been prevented, how to not make the same mistake in the future. But it is also important to be able to go on with your work and to be able to know that you can continue to do this kind of work. It doesn't say anything about you as a person. It's not personal. Recognize whatever mistakes may have been made and move forward. It's hard when it happens. I've seen it happen, as a conservation lab, like, we're the ones that get the broken stuff and like, oh, all the stories. I was walking down the stairs and I should have taken, you know, like whatever the story, like objects break when they're handled. It is simply a fact. So don't beat yourself up about it and move on. And then lastly, before we start passing things around, I just want to point out that as an art handler, as a caretaker of collections heritage, you are in a really great position to identify condition changes. You are often, as art handlers, the people who are closest to the artifacts and the ones who can tell when something is going wrong with storage or may go wrong with storage. So take advantage of that and communicate with your registration team, with your curators. If something's being handled too much, you're going to know. And so share that information. Share it with the people around you. And share what you've learned also, if you can. And then I wanted to just talk about a few of these objects and discuss some of the things that I consider when handling them. Let's see, this is large. I usually wear medium. My colleague Megan and I have exactly the same size hands, but I wear medium and she wears a small because she likes the gloves to be tight and I don't like them to be tight. I like them to be loose. So starting with the frogs. When looking at an artifact like this, anything that has been taxidermied or is a skin or a hide has the potential to have been contaminated by arsenic. Arsenic was commonly used in taxidermy practices up until the 70s. So when I see something like this, my first instinct is to protect myself and to handle it, assuming that it has a pesticide associated with it until I know otherwise. That said, I have tested this object and it does not have arsenic or mercury or lead or any of those. But if I didn't know that, I would be extremely careful when handling it. I have also, to show you guys, if I can get to it through my pile of stuff, an example of a dust mask. Oh, I can't see it. If you are particularly sensitive to mold, I recommend wearing a dust mask when you're working in collections areas. Again, to kind of protect yourself and your longevity as an art handler. They're not super comfortable to wear, they're not really attractive, but especially for people who have mold sensitivities, I really recommend them. And you can become mold sensitive even if you aren't already, especially if you handle things that have a lot of spores associated with them. When handling something that may or may not have been treated with a pesticide or some other kind of poison, a mask is also a good idea. Although I will say that a lot of those poisons and a lot of those pesticides are heavy metals, and it's hard for them to get airborne. Your real risk is through skin contact. It's not as much an inhalation risk as mold is. But that said, like, it doesn't hurt, you know, to wear a mask. And it can be a good idea. So those are things that I would think about before handling this. Is the poison issue and personal protection. And I notice as I go to look at it that it's a little dusty. It seems to be nailed to its base, so it's going to move with the base. It maybe wasn't, you know, there could be an object that isn't nailed to its base, and then you need to realize the base isn't going to come up with it. I always look before touching, but then after I've looked, like maybe I'll turn it around, and it looks like the base is pretty sturdy, so that's probably where I'm going to handle it from. But it also looks like it might be top heavy. I'm just thinking out loud to show you guys the process that I go through. So if I go to lift it and I have no idea how much it weighs, I might, you know, kind of, cradle a little bit. And then I say, oh, it's pretty secure. So I'm gonna handle it like this. And what's my first rule? Where am I going? Identify my destination location. I'm gonna go over there. And I'm gonna go right here. So I'm gonna clear a space. I'm going to clear a path. Okay, this is where I'm going. I'm going to pick it up, and I'm going to walk over there. And it sounds silly, but this kind of thinking prevents damage. And here I go. And here I am. And now I'm checking it out, make sure it's okay. Did anything happen? Did I leave any handprints on it? Is it okay? It's okay. So why don't you guys pass this around? I think you're probably going to want large gloves. So take some gloves. Yeah.
I missed the part about how does an object acquire pesticides and arsenic?
I didn't say that. You didn't miss it. So there are a couple of different ways. Objects that are made with feather, fur, skin, and hair are very vulnerable to insect infestation. That describes a lot of native collection materials and also a lot of collection materials from Africa and Oceania. So oftentimes it was standard collection practice to treat those objects with a pesticide. And the most common one was arsenic. They may have also been treated with lead or mercury. But arsenic was used widely throughout the United States in agricultural practices to protect seeds from being contaminated with bugs before they were planted. And there's actually a lot of arsenic in the ground soil because of the agricultural practices up until the 60s, I think. And a lot of institutions and a lot of private collectors would just, dust everything with arsenic powder as a standard protocol, not realizing or not really caring about what the potential health implications would be. Taxidermied materials were often, as the skins were being prepared in the taxidermy process, were often brushed with arsenic paste on the entire inside of the object before they're stuffed and sewn back together, and that arsenic can come through. It's the taxidermied objects that really have the highest concentration, or potentially the highest concentration of arsenic. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah? Okay. And one thing, when you're passing an object to another person, I like to establish, you kind of need to communicate about this, but let's see. Okay, let's practice. So I am going to hand the object to you. Okay. And what I'm going to do, in this case, I'm going to set it down and let her take it. But if we couldn't do that, what I would do is I would simply hold the object, and I would let her take it from me. Okay. So go ahead. And now I know she has it. Okay. What you don't want to do is okay, here's the wrong way to do it. I'm handing it to you, so hold your hands out. And then I think you have it. Okay. And you don't have it yet, right? So the person who has the object just presents it. Here it is, yeah. And just lets the other person pick it up. Like, I am the flat surface, and I will stay here until I know that I don't have the object anymore. I've handled a contaminated taxidermied object, and now I have contaminated gloves. And I want to make sure that I don't touch the contaminated surface with my fingers. So there are a variety of different ways you can do it, but one way is to kind of grasp the wrist, roll it inside out, so now the arsenic is on the inside, and then you can use that clean surface to pull the other one. Is that how you know to do it? Yeah? Okay. Does anyone else have any alternative technique for doing that?
So you can also grasp the palm
and
pull it off.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you just pull that into this one.
Uh-huh.
So you haven't touched your skin at all with this one.
Uh-huh.
And then you get clean hand, and then you can go
underneath. Yes.
And then that wraps the dirty one into that, and you got it back like that.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to try that. Wait, where's medium? Yeah, so.
Work as well when they're snug, though.
Oh, when they're snug? Okay, so you take the one,
With your gloved hand, you grab the palm,
okay,
pull it off.
like that,
Yep.
and then crumple it up,
Take your clean hand and go under,
under.
and pull it inside out with your hand. And then you get some
Oh, cool. I like that. That's good. Palm, yep. Yeah. Yeah, yep. And hold this in your, ball it up and hold it in your hand, but don't touch it.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, like
And
that.
these ones go under here.
Yeah. And turn it inside out. Right, and now we've got a little package for your,
Cool.
and then you throw it away. And it goes into the wastewater. Sorry. Another, we're almost out of time. Oh no. Okay, what do I want to tell you? There's so many things I want to tell you. Okay, so glass, a lot of people have glass in their collection, or glass is a component of your collections. Glass is very hard and brittle. Like if you bang on it, if you give it a lot of external physical force, it will break and shatter pretty easily. It can etch with fingerprints, so it's good to handle glass with gloves. Just an interesting fact, you may have objects in your collection that have this kind of greenish color, or maybe a green that's a little bit more yellow, like an acid green color. And it may be a kind of glass that was really popular in the 60s called uranium glass, which is actually made with uranium and is actually radioactive. This is not uranium glass, but it looks a lot like uranium glass. So if you see something in your collection that looks kind of like this, that has maybe a little bit more of a yellowish tinge to it, handle with care. Just be aware that that could be a potential health hazard for you and anyone who's working with it. I do have a sample in my own collection of uranium glass, and I have tested it with a Geiger counter, and it is radioactive, and I do not keep it in my bedroom. So just something to be aware of, just another one of the hazards. And then when we do, when I do this workshop and we have a little bit more time, what I do is I divide people into teams of 2 or 3, and I give them a larger or more complex object to actually plan the move for. We don't have time for everyone to do that now, but I am going to ask just for one volunteer to help me move this horse. Who wants to volunteer to help? Because this is a 2-person move. Yes, thank you. Step right up. So I'll take the lead on this move, just in the interest of time. Bonnie? Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for helping me. So what I'm looking at with this horse is to think about what is its condition? Are there areas of damage or previous repair? And I can say that the condition of this object is poor, and there are areas both of damage and previous repair and instability. So we have some pieces of the horse that are completely detached, and they are in a box that is not labeled. So this needs to go with the horse, wherever the horse goes, because if they get separated and no one knows, then that's bad. The horse wiggles on his base. This join is not secure. The horse is also quite heavy, which I can tell from doing a little test lift. And in addition to being heavy, the weight is not centered on the base. The weight is here, hanging out over this edge. So it could actually tip over fairly easily. So I've got a break edge here that I want to avoid. I've got a join here that moves that I need to stabilize. And I've got a weight issue that I need to deal with. So what I'm going to ask is I'm going to ask Bonnie to lift from right here, and to, if she needs to, stabilize the butt of the horse against her shoulder. You can either lift that way or, whichever side you feel strongest with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this end, and I'm actually probably going to end up taking most of the weight when we do the move. We're going to go to that corner over there, and there's nothing in between us. And
Skirts.
except for the table skirts. Okay. Are you okay? You feel all right about this?
Yeah.
And what we can do is we can lift. We're going to lift, and then we're just going to stand here.
Okay.
And if we need to put it back, we'll put it back.
Okay.
And I'll ask you if you're okay. And if you're okay, we'll keep going. And if you want to put it back, we can put it back.
Okay.
Okay? So, ready, lift. How do you feel? Good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here we go. See, I'm actually using like the side of my head. And now I'm going to switch my hand position a little. And we're going to go down like that. Are you down?
Mm-hmm.
Can you get that box of scraps and bring it near while I check the piece? Looks okay. Yay, well done. Thank you, Bonnie. So, an example of a two-person complex move with a fragile object. Totally fine. You can do it.